Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tara Parker Pope, founding editor of the New York Times Well section, and I'm excited to be joined today by our columnist, psychologist Lisa Damour. Lisa, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
We always like having you here and learn so much when we talk to you. Today's event is part of a slate of virtual events that the New York Times is producing to help readers understand and navigate the world in which we've all recently found ourselves. A quick housekeeping note, you can submit questions for us anytime using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We really want to hear from you, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can throughout the event. We're hoping to hear from teens if you're on the call. If you're comfortable with us sharing your first name, just let us know when you write in. You can include your age. You can also choose to submit a question anonymously. It's most important to us that we hear from you. So if you don't want to leave your name, that's okay too. We know there are parents listening, and you're welcome to join and ask questions. Just let us know if you're a parent. Please note that this event is being recorded and is audio only. So Lisa, one of the topics we touched on last time, but didn't really get to spend a lot of time on, is the difference between a teenager or a young person. I think we need to include, college students as well. Some of them might be, not teenagers anymore. What's the difference between being upset about how difficult life has become and suffering from a real mental health problem for which they might need to seek treatment? How would you give a young person guidance on that?
This is such an important question because upset feelings are so universal right now that I think young people can worry and parents can worry. Where's the line between having a logical and understandable reaction and worrying that mental health might be fragile and need to be shored up? So let's start with the fact that to be upset right now is probably evidence of a young person's excellent mental health, that they are having the right reaction, they're having the right feeling at the right time. What I want to see, though, is that their mood goes up and down. So they can feel very, very sad, but I want to see that there are times when they get a brightening, they feel some relief, or something cracks them up, or they do something fun and they feel sort of buoyed by it. So normal adolescence involves moods that go up and down. And even now, you have moods that go up and down, though they might go up and down a little more. I would worry about a young person who feels down and stays persistently down day after day. That's one ground for concern. The other is if a young person is falling back on negative coping strategies, that they feel upset, and so to manage that, they are abusing substances, or they're being incredibly difficult to live with all the time, or they are not taking good care of themselves at all. They're sleeping all the time. They're holing up in their rooms. They're, just addicted to their phones and not doing anything that is outward or healthy. Then I also think that's grounds for concern. And what I want people to know is that just as physicians are doing telehealth appointments, mental health clinicians are doing telehealth appointments. So if you're worried about yourself or someone in your family that you love, you don't have to wait until things go back to normal to seek a mental health consultation. These are widely available, and you should reach out if you're worried.
So we have a question from a listener who tells us, my teen isn't on this call because she won't get out of bed. She started talking to her therapist today, but I'd love to hear other tips to help her find the motivation to tackle her schoolwork and her running schedule. So it sounds like she might be an athlete. So let's just talk about that generally. A teen who just really won't get out of bed. It's not all that unusual, to be honest. Teens like to be in bed.
They do like their beds. And they also may feel like, what do I have to get out of bed for? What am I missing? There's not much happening. So I think what I would recommend in general, it's hard to know sort of person to person how this would go, but the general advice one would give on sort of situations like this would be to say to the young person, look, I get it. Being in bed is helping you feel better. It's working right now in the short term. But you and I both know over the long term, if you don't get out of bed for days at a time, you're actually going to end up feeling worse. So what's a small thing that you can do or we can do that might actually feel good and might actually help boost your mood a little bit? And I think sometimes when people are really down, they can think, well, I'll do more when I feel better. And it's important for us to help them kind of flip that equation and think, oh, if you do more, you're probably going to feel better. Not to wait until they feel better to try a few more things, but to encourage them to think of one or two things that could be pretty fun and then to give them a try.
But maybe keep it sort of a small, I mean, I think sometimes I see teenagers getting very overwhelmed if you say you need to do this, this, and this. They seem to respond better if you say, what about this one thing? What about this idea? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Or to say, I can think of 3 or 4 things. Can you think of 3 or 4 things? And then let's just pick 1 or 2 to try.
All right. So a listener asked, she's a high, it might be I can't tell who it is. I am a high school teacher in the Midwest. Could you please touch on the morning of what all this means for seniors not being able to participate in their milestone celebrations? So, the grief and sadness that teens are feeling, I think this is such a big issue right now.
It is. I mean, the loss is enormous, especially when I think about the class of 2020 and all of these things that are sort of once in a lifetime events that they won't get to do. And it's bad enough. And I think sometimes, we can think, oh, come on, it's 35 seconds on a stage, getting your diploma, or prom is overrated, it's not that big a deal. But I think what we have to remember is that teenagers look forward to these things as a way to get through the slog of school sometimes. So in January, when they weren't feeling like doing their schoolwork, they do it by daydreaming about what they're going to wear to prom. They can kind of hold that out as the thing they're looking forward to. And in February, they think about, oh, we're going to do this for my graduation party. So these events, which are big in their own right, have also loomed large in young people's minds for a long time. And they're sort of like beacons on a hill, and now they're gone. So mourning is a good terminology, while we, bear in mind that it can mean a lot of different things. But teenagers have every right to be very, very sad.
Go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I think we should start just by giving them tons of empathy, absolute tons of empathy, and also not suggesting that there's anything we can do that would really take the place of what's been lost. I think it's important to not try to think of what some fabulous second that will be just as good. Nothing will be just as good. And it's better for us to just sort of sit with that.
And acknowledge the disappointment. I'm somebody, my parents moved, and so I missed the second part of my senior year. So I didn't get my prom, I didn't get my senior week, I didn't get my graduation from high school. So I really am relating to this class of 2020. That was many, many years ago, but it's a real loss. And it is something that obviously life goes on and you have many wonderful things in your future. But when you're 18, you don't have that perspective. You don't sort of have a lifetime of experiences to understand where this fits in terms of perspective, right? You just don't have enough life experience.
You don't. And I think that's a place where grown-ups can step and be helpful, because we can both give tons of empathy, which really is deserved. And then we can say, I don't think this is going to change the course of your life. I don't think this is going to be a dent that you can't recover from. I think it's really crummy, but I don't think you have to worry that the loss of the plans that you had are going to knock you off course indefinitely. My experience is that teenagers are relieved by that perspective, because it's not something that they themselves can yet have. And yet we, in middle age can offer that.
I also think the class of 2020 has this incredible shared experience of disappointment. And that's going to really, I think that this is going to bind friendships, and people are going to have the shared experience going forward. I think it's probably helpful just to talk about their feelings with their friends, I would think.
I think it can be. I think some adults worry, and I've heard some parents worry, that in some ways they can kind of muck around in the sadness together, that when they get talking with their friends, it can kind of deepen their distress at times. And that, that may help them move past it. That may help them kind of, feel worse, which I think adults can worry about. I think the other place we can come in as we try to help teenagers through this is to say, anything we do will not be as good as what you were planning on. But what could we do that might be better than nothing? And I think kind of changing the yardstick for how good something is may help teenagers accept what adults are trying to offer. Yard signs that communities are doing to celebrate the class of 2020, and all of these other really sweet creative things that are coming up. They will never be as good as what was planned, but we can open up the door that they might be something that helps to take the sting out of what they've lost.
That's right. That's good advice. So I really like this question, because partly from my own experience with my own daughter, a teenager asked, How can I communicate to my parents that I'm doing well and coping with the situation because they are worrying too much about me and won't give me space?
Isn't that interesting? And I've heard this a little bit, of kids feeling like, really, I'm okay. No, guys, you don't have to worry so much. Um, I think what I would say, in general, to teenagers who are worrying about this, I would say, first of all, know that your parents are coming from a loving place, and know that your parents may see this differently than you do. They often may have their own very powerful memories of like loving prom or loving graduation or loving the spring of, junior year of high school. And that may be their experience, and they may be sad for your loss, but that may not be your experience, or you may be okay with this. But I think you can actually just be really lighthearted, with your parents and be like, no, really, guys, I'll tell you if I'm not okay, but you got to take my word. I'm okay right now.
As a parent, it does make me feel better when my daughter says, Mom, really, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. There's a difference. I don't know. Sometimes your parents need reassurance too, guys. We worry about you so much, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it comes from a loving place, even if it can start to feel sort of annoying sometimes.
So we have a student asking, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to answer this question, but we can at least try to give her some guidance. Asmara asked, when can we go back to school? And that is the big question right now about when we are going to try to start returning to a more normal life. And I think that every community, various communities are going to do this different ways. Are you getting this simple question from the people you're hearing from?
Absolutely. I mean, there's such, I think there was sort of getting through the spring and coming to terms with the fact that, okay, this is what spring looks like, and spring's not, school's not happening this spring. But now everybody's thinking, okay, but what is going to happen when the fall rolls around? And the way I think young people should approach this is to know that they will go to school. We're just trying to figure out what that looks like. And I recently heard a really smart head of school say, we're going to spend the summer building 3 airplanes, and then we'll figure out which one we're going to fly. And I thought that was a pretty good metaphor for the fact that schools don't know. They have to work with a lot of information they don't have, and they're going to have to wait for that information to come in. And they're going to figure it out. And I think it's important for young people to prepare themselves for the fact that it probably won't be school, just like they remember from before. But there will be time over the summer for educators to give this some thought and to do a really good job with it, which they did not have this spring.
Right. I think, yeah, and I think we'll get more information. And I think everybody should realize that the goal is to get kids back to school. The goal is to get life as much back to normal as possible. It's just not going to maybe be exactly like it was for a little while. A teenager, Rachel, asked, as a teen, how do I help my family members who are sick or have lost their jobs? So I think that's an interesting question because it's not the teenager who's struggling. She sees people around her who's struggling.
That's a heavy one. That's a heavy one. I think at some level, we're all dealing with a great deal of helplessness, and even an adult can't necessarily do something for someone who is sick or has lost their job. But let's not forget what a powerful thing kindness is and empathy is. That when we are just saying to people, look, I hear you, this is a really hard time, and if you need to talk about it, I am here to have that conversation. That is a huge gift. Sometimes we feel like if we can't solve the problem, we're not doing anything or we're not able to be useful at all. But a lot of the problems that COVID-19 presents us with, we can't solve. And we should not underestimate that it's one thing to have a problem, it's another thing to feel totally alone with it. And what we can give one another is that people don't have to feel alone with the hard things they're facing.
I think that as a parent, if my daughter shows me a sign of support or just shows me that she cares, it goes a long way with a parent. It means a lot to us. And I also often say to her that when my life is tough, self-care for her, if she's taking care of herself, if she's well and happy, that's a burden I don't have to worry about. And I think that for teenagers, taking care of yourself does help your parents, because when we see that you're well, we worry less. Would you agree with that, Lisa?
I think that's true. I think there's that that saying, you're only as happy as your least happy child.
Yeah.
And there is some comfort in knowing your kid's all right. And yet at the same time, if a parent is struggling, I wouldn't want them to give any child the sense that the child then needs to not have needs. Um, I think that we can care for one another while we're feeling crummy, everybody all around, and that can be an okay thing.
I think I was more addressing the idea that if you feel helpless as a teenager, if you feel like you can't do anything, just being there, being present is helpful to
Absolutely.
your parents. We have a question from a teenager. My parents keep questioning and drilling me about the flaws of my online school curriculum, the lack of Zoom meetings, etc. How do I give her closure, get her off my back? So I think this is important because school is being handled differently. Maybe not the way we expect it to be handled as parents.
It is, and whatever schools do, no matter how fabulous and excellent it is, especially given how little time they had to prepare, it will just not be nearly as good as what they're good at doing all the time. But there's an interesting dynamic here where the parent is much more worried and concerned about the quality of the education being received than it sounds like the teenager is. Like the teenager seems to feel okay with it and feels like maybe the parent is making too big a deal of it. And what I would assume in this moment is that it's very hard as a parent sometimes to know where to direct your energies right now. There's a lot we can't fix and there's a lot we can't make the way we want to make it. So sometimes we home in on something we feel like we might be able to control, and we may bring a disproportionate amount of energy to that thing just because it's the thing we can control. So what I wonder if is happening in this is if the parent feels like there's a lot out of control, but if we could just get school right, this would feel better.
Right.
But we can't get school right now.
I think I would tell that teenager, just from a practical standpoint, that including your parents on the communication, sharing information from your teacher, just forwarding them the emails, letting them see, because I think part of our frustration sometimes as parents is we don't know what's going on, right? So I would just advise this teen, if you want to get your mom off your back, just try to share as much information with her as possible. I mean, you're not responsible for the content of the schoolwork. It's your teachers and your school, and hopefully you can communicate this. So I have a question from somebody in Germany. Courtney, here in Germany, they are planning on opening schools again in the next few weeks. And that's causing my daughter a lot of anxiety. How can we work through this together? So this is an interesting idea. We know kids want to go back to school, but there's going to be some anxiety about getting back together in groups, I imagine.
Yes, and this is a tough one because it's really, the anxiety is not entirely without grounds, right? That there are real concerns as we all, whenever we do start to sort of return to the world, that does mean our risk level will go up, and we need to think about that. So what you're going to have to balance, right? What a person has to balance in this is, on the one hand, acknowledging the heightened level of risk and all that we can do to keep ourselves safe, which is a lot. And on the other, really recognizing that avoidance tends to feed anxiety. That when we're frightened of something, our anxiety goes up, and when we decide to avoid it, our anxiety goes down. And that experience of having a tremendous and instantaneous relief from anxiety can actually make us want to keep avoiding. And so one of the things that can be helpful is to take sort of small steps toward it. So a parent might say, look, I see that you're really, really anxious. Why don't you do this? Go the first day and see how they're handling things. Do all the things you can do to keep yourself safe, which is a lot. And then let's talk about it at the end of the day and see where we are. But urging small steps can help people get past avoidance, and allowing avoidance tends to amplify the anxiety.
So kind of in that same vein, we have a high school senior asking, I think people are worried about the future. This high school senior says, how can I adjust to the idea that I might not get to go away to college in the fall? This is a huge issue for the class of 2020.
It is a huge issue, and it's such a totally bizarre set of circumstances, and especially against the backdrop of what a ramp up it is to the idea of heading off to college, right? If you think about many young people, their high school career has been, in large part for a subset of young people, organized around the idea of going to college. And then to have the rug pulled out at such a late point in the game is really hard. So what I have been saying to high schoolers in the class of 2020 is, can you wait and watch? Can you see what the colleges are able to start to put in front of you as options? You may have to wait all the way till July to get a sense of what they think is possible and what they're making possible. And I think we do need to give colleges a chance to figure out some plans and articulate plans to students. And right now we're all operating in the dark, and students are wondering what's going to happen, and colleges will tell them, I'm sure, as soon as they can. But I said in a conversation with a high schooler, a 2020 high schooler the other day, I said, whatever else, can you reconcile yourself to the fact that you're going to have a very weird year? And that seemed to help her, this idea that like, it's going to be a weird year, and hopefully it won't go on too much past that. But we kind of have to settle into this idea that it's going to take time for this to get resolved.
I think a lot of people, not just teenagers, are having a hard time imagining the new reality, the new normal. And yeah, I think it's important to tell teenagers that there are going to be changes and there's going to be delays, but these goals and these hopes and dreams that they have are still out there for them.
Absolutely.
The path may not just be quite exactly what they thought it was going to be to get there.
Yeah, but that's exactly right. And I think what we have to recognize is that uncertainty is incredibly hard on people. And right now we have so much uncertainty while we wait for things like testing and vaccines and things that will be the exit strategy, but it will get easier as we have a sense of how those things are coming along.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. So let's go on. A listener, this sounds like a young person. My girlfriend is an only child. I have a brother. So what can I do to make her feel not as lonely while distancing? So obviously it doesn't sound like these families are necessarily that they're separated. So how do you help people that you're close to, but maybe you don't get to spend time with them and you feel they're lonely?
This is something I'm hearing a lot of teenagers being lonely, missing one another desperately, missing the physical contact of being together, whether it's romantic or sexual at all, just the ways in which teenagers kind of flap on each other and get that tactile contact from each other, which everybody needs. And I think there will be a category of experiences in this that cannot be fixed, but can be talked about. And there's something about talking about it, about naming it, about using words to share it, that can take some of the pain out of something. So again, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record on this, to that young person, I would say, do not underestimate how useful it is for you to say, I know you're lonely and I am missing you, and I'm going to do everything I can to feel connected and close to you when I can't see you, and it'll be really, really wonderful when I can see you. That goes far. That's not nothing.
And I think in that same area, a parent asked, now that teens can't spend time in person with their friends, is it fair or advisable to relax limits on things like Fortnite, TikTok, etc., so they can interact with them at least digitally, virtually? What do you think about changing screen time rules?
I think you probably should. I think it's what they've got. It's a way to be connected. And I also, those examples, those are about connecting with peers. And, my general view on screens, it's always the same. Just make sure they don't interfere with really key aspects of child development and adolescent development, like getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, being a, working member of the family. Screens should not crowd out these important basics, including even the ability to work with focus, do one's academic work without having too many intrusions or any intrusions from digital technology. But this is an exceptional time, and I think we should recognize it as such. And, we want to be kind to our kids right now. And Fortnite and Minecraft and things like that, they may not be our first choice for entertainment, but there's way worse options than those. And so they're not the worst thing in the world.
I have to say, TikTok, I think, is kind of a lot of fun. And I see young people being really creative and they're dancing. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's a good opportunity for parents to say, show me some of the stuff you like, because it's active. It's sweet. I think parents might be surprised about some of the social media that's out there.
No, it is cute. And I think you're right to say, like, show me what you like, or what is this thing, or how does this work? I think can be a way that might actually, like you mentioned, like allay some parent fears and anxieties about what is this thing that you're looking at, and may be fun. Or the parent may just discover that it's kind of banal, right? It's not maybe the parent's cup of tea, but it's hardly toxic.
Right, right. Another teenager writes, I'm also an only child. Do you have any recommendations for us? Lots of other families have more comfort because there's multiple children around, options to have other conversations. Uh, a lot of single people are facing this too. Their lives are just different. They're not in a house with a busy family. It's
Yeah.
really them. You have thoughts for those people?
Well, everything I understand from the recommendations is that you can see people 6 feet apart, especially if you're outdoors. And so, especially with the weather lightening up a little bit and getting nicer, I would say, there's no reason, as far as I understand from the medical recommendations, that you couldn't say if you had a public space or a backyard, have people over and maybe set up chairs 6 feet apart and see people. And they have to go to the bathroom before they come over to your house, and they have to leave when they have to go to the bathroom again. But other than that, like, my sense is that people can be together. It's just sort of inconvenient right now.
I think we have to be a little careful though with some of that advice because it's a slippery slope. I mean, right now the guidance is social distancing, especially in places like New York. And I do think it's probably okay under supervised conditions to let teens, take a walk together, or maybe, I wouldn't suggest a big group.
Yeah.
Maybe a best friend, the family, the care they're taking. And, I've had older people write to me and say, is it okay if maybe I bring my lawn chair and we sit across the driveway 6 feet apart and we bring our own dinner and we just have an evening of chat across the driveway? And of course, I think that's a good idea because we need people, right? We just have to, I think, just involve your parents and come up with a plan and just be very mindful that we still need to follow the rules, and that especially it's not really the teenagers that are at the high risk of becoming ill, but if you have contact with an older family member or a grandparent. So I think you're right. I think what we're going to start seeing very soon are guidelines to help us form small groups, learn how to get back into some social circles safely. And that's going to be the direction we go this summer, especially outdoors, especially in nice weather where it is safer to do that. A parent asked, my teenager is feeling particularly clingy. How can I stay close but still maintain my space without hurting her feelings? Oh, this question kind of breaks my heart. What would you say to that?
Well, so one thing I do wonder, and I don't know if it's clingy in the literal sense or the emotional sense or both, but that thing about teenagers having tactile contact with their friends and then not being able to do that right now, I think there may be a way in which teenagers are closer to their parents just out of missing literally the physical closeness that they enjoy with their friends. So there may be some of that. And I think, if you've got a teenager at home who you think might be missing their friends a lot, I would, if it isn't weird and if it's the kind of relationship you have, you might like swing by and rub their back a little or something that just gives them some sense of contact and touch and closeness, just because I think they're missing that very badly. Then I would say, as a general rule, if a young person is seeming needy or clingy, I would find a very gentle way to ask about it and just say, man, I notice that if I leave the room, you're wondering where I am. Like, what's the story there? Like, what's going on? And see if that's a grounds for a conversation. See if you can't actually learn a little bit more about what's behind that. But it can be asked in a way that isn't suggesting that it's not okay, but it can just be expressing a curiosity about it.
So we have several questions from teenagers, which I'm really pleased about. I'm going to go through them. This one may not apply to all students, but I think it's going to be one that some parents have to deal with. This student says that they use marijuana to cope with things. Is there any chance it's a good idea to ask my parents to let me? How would you, that's a tough question.
It is a tough question. I'm going to answer it in the way I think any psychologist would, which is you want to be really, really careful about using substances to manage psychological distress. They do work extremely well. They make you feel better right away. They blunt the discomfort very effectively. But any of us who've practiced for a while have watched that become a slippery slope, where using substances regularly blunts emotional distress, but tends to create other problems. That people don't sleep as well, minimally. They also then sometimes struggle to maintain their responsibilities. Things don't always go so well if you're using a lot of substances. And then what happens is you have more emotional distress because of the things that are not going well. And then you've laid the groundwork for a real substance use problem. So my answer on this is pretty conservative because I have taken care of a lot of the worst case scenarios and bad outcomes, and they're really awful to see. And they usually do begin with a pattern of using substances to blunt distress. So what I would say is find another way to feel better, and find a way that does not hold in it a long-term problem in the making.
All right. Another teenager asks, I know I'm not getting enough sleep right now. What can I do?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, let me just start by saying a lot of teenagers are finally getting the sleep they deserve, which, we've known all along that teenagers need at least 9 hours of sleep a night as a general group, and we've known all along that they hardly ever get that. So one thing I am hearing from a lot of teenagers is that they're finally getting a decent amount of sleep, and I think that is terrific. So what I would want to know is, okay, well, what's getting in the way? That if you're not getting enough sleep, something's getting in the way. And a likely culprit might be digital technology. That digital technology is a wonderful thing and it is an enemy of sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep and that happens to be the culprit, I would definitely recommend separating yourself from digital technology for a little while before you want to go to sleep. And if you can, and I would recommend this, not having it come into the bedroom with you.
And we know that the light from screens affects your brain and keeps you awake. So it's not just about saying digital technology is bad, because it's not bad. It can be a terrific way to stay connected, but it can keep your brain awake, which can interfere with sleep.
It suppresses the melatonin that actually helps us feel sleepy. And it contains exciting and surprising information. That often when we're scrolling through social media, it's a little bit, for me, I think it's a little bit of a slot machine. Sometimes when you're scrolling through social media, you find something that's kind of funny or cute or boosts your mood a little bit. And sometimes you find something that's really upsetting or unexpected and really gets you stirred up. And so any point in the day, it's a slot machine. And certainly if you're about to go to bed, do not pull the slot machine, because you could end up with some upsetting thing that gets you going and it makes it hard for you to go to sleep.
So we have another question from a teenager, a tough question, but I think we could find a lot of people might relate to this in some way, feeling like maybe they don't feel as accepted in their families. I'm a trans teen who is currently stuck with their transphobic family. My school friends are really the only people who are accepting of me. Do you have any advice?
We hear this a lot from young people who maybe don't fit with what their parents' idea of who they should be or how they should be. And it's hard. And in fact, for young people who find themselves in that position, becoming a teenager is really a wonderful thing, because it branches out your connections and you get to really strengthen ties to people outside the family. And I know, I hear from a lot of young teens who maybe don't get along with their family so well for that reason or others. And this is an especially hard time for those kids when they are not able to see their friends in person and then spending a lot of time with a family they don't get along with well. This is a moment where I'm like, yay, social media, yay, digital connection with your peers. And what I would say is, thank goodness there are ways for you to commune with the people who support you in the day-to-day normally. And I fully assume and hope that you're getting to do the same now.
So we have a teenager asking a question. I'm a teenager and I feel like I am always depressed. What can I do? So do you have any sort of specific guidance? If you're a teenager, you know that you're depressed, what steps would you suggest they take?
Well, so the most important thing to say here is depression is a treatable illness. So I don't know whether this person has a clinical depression as we would diagnose it, and that's not that kind of thing I could say here. But if you suspect that you do, if anyone suspects that they do, or they suspect that their teenager does, it should be evaluated. And it's really important that young people and adults understand that depression is treatable, anxiety is treatable. These are disorders that we have understood for a long time as clinical psychologists, and where we have actually a wide variety of treatments available, and they are effective. So with regard to depression or anxiety or anything along those lines, if someone was worried that they were really suffering with an ongoing and persistent problem, the most important thing for them to know is this does not have to be a life sentence. This is something that can really be addressed, and you want to get yourself good help, and you want to make use of the good help. And this can be something that's either gone from your life or really well managed in your life, but it doesn't have to be something that feels like you carry it with you everywhere you go.
But should this teenager talk to their parents and ask about therapy, or I'm not really sure what the situation is. What's the first step for a student to get help?
So for young people in situations like this, I would normally say, have you checked in with your folks? Have you talked with them about it? And see if they've reached out. And that would be a really good first step in a general way. Sometimes young people say, well, I did, but they didn't take it seriously. And then I would typically say, and I would say it now too, have you checked in with the counselor at your school? Because all schools have counselors for the most part. And counselors are very adept usually at helping young people connect with help or working with young people's parents to get young people help. So if there's a dead end with parents, then I would go find another grown-up who may be able to come in and be useful. And I know a lot of counselors who are very adept at helping parents get on board with the idea of an evaluation.
So I'm going to read you a couple questions that are the same theme of teenagers who are worried about their friends. One teen says, I'm 12 and my friend is 13. We are best friends, but I haven't had contact with her. We almost have the same mental health problems, and I'm really worried because she's very sensitive. Another reader says, I'm a ninth grader. My best friend has been dealing with mental health and eating problems this year. Her parents are terrible at helping her. So I've been trying to talk to her about her issues. She has not appreciated this. I'm really worried about her being stuck with her parents while she's in this fragile state. What can I do to make sure she doesn't get more depressed or just stop eating? I've tried talking to her parents and this hasn't helped. So 2 young people who have friends, they're worried about their friends' mental health.
This is a tricky one. And it's a tricky one under normal conditions. And then it's a tricky one when everybody's at a distance. So under normal conditions, we see it all the time. The young people are so good at caring about and worrying about one another and really do tend to their friends very lovingly and very completely. And one of the things we need to do as adults is to both encourage young people to take really good care of each other, and then also to draw some pretty clear lines about when they're aware of a problem that a grown-up needs to know about. So when I talk with young people about this, I say, okay, you are free to take care of one another. We want you to, and keep each other's secrets and all of that, except for these 5 things. And I actually have 5 areas where I say to young people, if you know about this, you need to let a grown-up know. So one is depression/suicidality. I sort of put those together. Another is eating concerns, which comes up here. Another is very out of control behavior on the weekend. So like drinking, driving, sex, drugs, stuff in that department that feels uncontrolled. Another is self-harm in any way. And the last is relationship violence, that sometimes young people are in relationships that are really, really unhealthy and maybe even dangerous. So I really draw very clear lines between what's a kid's responsibility to help a friend through and when a grown-up needs to know. So in the first one, it's hard to know really where we are on those lines. In the second one around eating, clearly there's a line. And this young person who's asking has already done this. They've already reached out to the parents. I would then say again what I said before, try a school counselor then. Whether it's your school counselor or even if you don't go to the same school as a friend, the counselor at the friend's school, and just say, I'm really worried about this person, but a grown-up needs to know, both so that your friend has a better chance of getting the help they need, and also so that you're not left holding this, because it's actually not fair for a young person or even an adult with no training to feel that they are responsible for things that are typically cared for by people who have specialized training.
Okay, so we have about 5 more minutes. I have a couple more questions. So a couple teenagers are writing about maybe too much family time. One teen says, I am an introvert, but my parents keep trying to force me to spend time with them every minute I'm not doing schoolwork. How do I tell them in a way that's not rude, that I just don't want to? And another teen, Lisa, asks, I love my parents and my brother, but I am sick of eating dinner every night together. How can I ask for some alone time?
I love these. I
Yeah.
love these. They're just wonderful. So first of all, I love how much perspective in this, like the total awareness of here's who I am and here's who they are and how do we, meet in the middle. So I think that built into the question is a lot of the solution. It sounds like from the insights that these young people have about themselves, I would encourage them, if they haven't already, to go to their parents and say, okay, I love you guys and I think you are absolutely wonderful, but your need for human contact is higher than my need for human contact. So can we negotiate here? And see if they can't meet you halfway. The important thing in a negotiation like this is you have to make sure the parent isn't taking it personally. So it's really helpful to reassure them that it's not about your feelings for them. It's entirely about your need for a little time on your own. And when parents are reassured in that way, and especially if you can do it in a light way or with a little touch of humor, parents can usually take it.
And I think probably some parents are in need of some privacy right now too, and some alone time. Wouldn't you think? That everybody in the house probably
Absolutely.
needs.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a strange thing that we've been thrust into this completely different configuration from how we used to live life. And it now looks like we're going to be here for a while. So everybody has to figure this out all over again. And it's okay if it takes us some time to figure it out. This is all very new and very strange.
So one of our last questions is from a parent. All I hear is that it's important to stick to a schedule right now. My 13-year-old refuses to follow any schedule. Is it okay for her to have a less structured environment?
I love this question. So when we look at the protective processes for kids, like what's good for kids under conditions like this, one is having a sense of routine and control or predictability. And the other is having enjoyable relationships at home. And I think what you want to do is you want to play these off against each other. So if you're working so hard on predictability that it's ruining your relationship with your kid, you should probably let the predictability go down. If you are having so much, have thrown away all the rules and you're having a really, really great time, but your child is doing nothing of use all day long, you probably need a few more rules. So you want to sort of find a space between those two things. But when we think about what it means to have predictability or routine or schedule, I don't think it has to mean that every moment of the day is accounted for. I think it can mean something like, we're going to have dinner at 6 every day. That's a done deal, and I need you to be here for that. And we're also going to do this at this time every day. So there can be a few things that are nailed down in the course of the day. And if that feels like it gets the job done and you can still enjoy your kid, that may be enough for now.
But you have said that teenagers do like routine and they'd like schedule, right? We talked about that before.
It's helpful to have a routine and a schedule because it actually decreases how many decisions you have to make in a day, and decisions are exhausting. And so to the degree that we can have some basic sense of a pattern for how our day unfolds, it actually frees up bandwidth to do other things. Whereas if you wake up every day thinking, well, now how's this going to go? It can make for a very frustrating and exhausting day where you don't feel like you got anything done that you wanted to get done, and you spent the whole day trying to figure out what you were going to do.
Right, right. Okay. Well, this has been really interesting to hear from these young people. Have any of these questions surprised you or reinforced what you think teens are thinking about right now?
These do seem to feel in line with what young people are going through. And I think that gives us sort of an interesting way to wrap up, which is, as strange and in many ways awful as this all is, it's also a very universal experience. And I think sometimes young people feel like they're missing out or things are, they're being knocked off course. And the one piece that I do think might feel reassuring is that recognition that you're part of an entire cohort that's having the exact same hiccups, the exact same speed bumps put in their way. And so this cohort's going to move through it together and deal with these hassles and these changes and these disruptions together. But for better or for worse, it's not something happening to one kid alone who's falling behind or being left out. It's very much a shared experience.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners and especially the teenagers who are here for joining us today. And thanks, of course, to Dr. Lisa Damour for answering our questions. Thanks, Lisa. It's always great talking to you.
Thank you.
This event is part of an ongoing conversation series with the New York Times journalists that takes place daily at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow at 4, you can hear from Genia Belafonte, writer of the Big City column in the Times, to discuss practical lessons for doing charitable work in times of crisis. To find out more about our full slate of digital events, please visit timesevents.nytimes.com. Is that right, guys? timesevents.nytimes.com. And finally, we want to give a special thank you to all of our subscribers. You make our work possible. We look forward to speaking with you again.